Hello and welcome to another episode of Anomalies. I'm often asked what the name of this program dredges up or connotes, and what I think of is going down a road and finding an exit or a side road that you've never taken, and you decide to take that road, and it ends up to be way more exciting and mysterious than you thought. So we're going to get pretty mysterious tonight with our guest Pete Orbea, who's part of Port Gamble Paranormal. Is that the organization that you're with?
Yes, sir. Well, I am the organization.
Well, that's even better. So there's only one person we need to talk to.
That's
So,
right.
kind of what the path I'd like to start us on is, how did you get involved in the paranormal? Did you have experiences that led you that way, or was there some other kind of route to be involved?
Great question, and thanks for having me on the show. I'm glad to be
Oh, sure.
here.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah. I guess it's my journey into the paranormal has been lifelong, except for the first half of my life. I just didn't realize what it was. So, as a kid, but I've had experiences since I can remember. Um, and it just seems like everywhere I've gone or worked, strange stuff happens.
Hmm.
And then I ended up in the town of Port Gamble, which is one of Washington's oldest towns, started in 1853, and it's pretty well preserved from what it was early on. And having the opportunity to do historical research here and be in the places doing investigations just kind of sealed the deal for me. But growing up, I saw an apparition of two Native Americans in
Hmm.
northern Arizona when I was about 7 years old. Um, I was driving with my grandparents, and um, I don't know if you're familiar with northern Arizona and the highways. There's often a lot of flat area on the sides of the highways. And so we were just driving down the highway heading to Sedona, and all of a sudden, two Native Americans appeared in the road with their backs towards us, and then they turned towards each other, kind of looking over their shoulder at us. And my grandfather hit the brakes and pretty hard, and as soon as we got to where they were, they just vanished.
Hmm.
And looking in the mirrors, there was nothing. And my grandfather was from a different generation, but he looked at me and said, "Did you see the old Indians in the road?" And I said, "Yes." And he said,
Hmm.
"Don't tell your grandmother, because she'll get freaked out."
Hmm.
And so that was kind of one of my first experiences I can remember. And then growing up in Boise, Idaho, I worked at the historic Egyptian Theater, which is
Oh,
in
yeah.
downtown
Very
Boise.
familiar with that place. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was a manager at the theater there,
Cool.
and it was like a nightly occurrence. You would hear people walking by your office and talking and laughing. You'd hear footsteps, doors opening and closing, and I was able to, look out into the corridor outside my office and see clearly that nobody was there.
Hmm.
So that kind of became second nature. That just it was so active. It was like nightly,
Hmm.
and yeah, and then making my way up to Washington and finding this great place. There's just been so many experiences that I was like, I think I'm meant to research this and be a part of it.
That
So
would be
there's
my
there's a long
guess.
answer. There's
That
a
would be
long
my
answer.
guess. Let's go back to your grandpa and grandma.
Yeah.
So it sounds like your grandpa saw the Native Americans. Did you have any indication that your grandma saw them, or did you even
Well, she
broach that
was,
topic?
yeah, she was sleeping. She
Okay.
was out,
Hmm.
on the long road trip, and I wasn't quite sure what I was seeing until my grandfather looked at me after they had vanished, and he looked in the mirrors. I remember I looked in the rearview mirror. I was sitting in the middle. It was a truck, and I was in the middle on the bench seat in the front. And so it happened fairly quickly, but when he looked over and said, "Did you see them in the road?"
Hmm.
That to me, I was I didn't quite know what to think about that because I didn't know what I was seeing, but he saw it too.
Right.
And so, and it was kind of, um, my grandfather was a pretty straightforward guy. Um, and so for him to have that reaction too, it kind of made me a little bit scared because I was like, what did we just see?
Right.
But it was validation that what I saw as well. So that was
C-
neat. That was a
Yeah,
neat
because somebody
experience.
else saw it. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. Talk
Hmm.
about some of your other early experiences that, and you just said with the Egyptian theater in Boise, but can you remember any other experiences that kind of focused you down this pathway in life?
Yeah. Well, even before 7 years old, I vaguely remember parts of this that um, my mom has told me that I would always talk about this tall man in the corner of my room,
Hmm.
and that it was, like a shadow sort of thing. And I've, vaguely remember bits and pieces of that, and I've later thought it might have been my great grandfather
Oh,
based on the description, the shape of it, and everything. Um, Growing up, um, well, I didn't really know much about being psychic, medium, or the woo woo as people call it.
uh-huh.
I was really into science fiction growing up, and so my head was I was always looking at the stars. But growing up, there was just times where um, I would have all these feelings that I didn't know what it was coming from. And I'm a Star Wars fan, as you can probably tell with my
Yeah,
what's behind me.
definitely.
But I often would describe it as in Star Wars Episode 4, Obi-Wan Kenobi falls over and says he felt the screams of a million people,
Hmm.
the planet being destroyed. He felt it, and so that's kind of one of the best ways I could describe. Some days I would just have all these feelings that I didn't really feel like they were mine, and it was very overwhelming sometimes. And I would have I just thought I had a strong imagination. I would like see people in my mind, and I would like know their name, or they would have a name. And I'd always be like, why am I thinking of this person? I don't know them. I've never seen him before. And so that was kind of like off and on through my teenage years, and well, really up until my early 30s, where I just had these feelings and like I said, I thought it was just a weird imagination of,
Hmm.
of being able to picture people and what they look like and what's, who they are, what they're about. And then in my early 30s, I went to the Oregon Ghost Conference in Seaside,
Right.
which is every spring, and it's a wonderful conference to go to. And I decided to have a psychic reading done. There was a gentleman there, Seth Michael, and he was offering a special rate for readings at the conference. And I thought, I was super skeptical of it. And I thought, yeah, I'll give this a shot. And he basically blew my mind. He had me start my own reading and, um, you know, had some questions about what it was like growing up, and said that you don't even know it, but you're a medium and you'll be
Uh-huh.
doing your own readings within a year. And I had a grandfather that came through and a grandmother that came through in the reading. And it was just a really cool experience. But during the reading, something happened, and I just had tons of butterflies started flying around in my body the whole time. And very overwhelming amount. And then after that, I discovered that the Universal 2x4 smacked me in the head and
Hmm.
said that I'm going to listen and pay attention now. And I was doing my own readings professionally within a year, which is pretty quick to be doing it. But I had a lot of great mentors around me. that really helped out with that. So it's kind of like there were some things that happened as a kid growing up that I didn't really understand until my early 30s when I had this kind of awakening experience. And then it was like kind of like, when you hear about someone near death, their life passes before their eyes. It was kind of that
Hmm.
sort of thing for me where I was able to look back and go, oh my gosh, that's what this was. That's what these feelings were. That's what these people were may have been spirit that I was seeing. And I just didn't realize it. But
Right.
so I had a number of like physical experiences where I know I'm seeing things with my eyes, you know, um, hearing stuff, definitely a lot of hearing things. And then like the Native American warriors were like solid apparitions to me. They were like they looked like real people to me. Um, so yeah, there's been kind of a whole mix growing up of things, and it didn't all make sense until about 12 years ago.
Well, it did. It sounds like it just took you a while to get there.
And I was probably the right time for me to get there. It's probably more like what it was. It was not the right time before, but it was the right time about
Hmm.
12 years ago. So I think that's all happened when it did for a reason.
Hmm. I belong to something, in addition to doing this podcast, I belong to something called Opus, the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support. I don't know
Oh,
if you've ever heard of them.
I have not, but that sounds very interesting.
Yeah, you should check it out. They have a website. I'll send you a link after we get done with
Thank you.
this. But what's really cool is, and you kind of referred to this in our discussion, a lot of people have these strange experiences and they can't tell anybody, or they're afraid to tell somebody because of how they might be judged or just how they might be perceive. So what
Yep.
Opus does is have people like me contact them and listen to them primarily, their story, and then sometimes they get traumatized or something happens to them. We have a list of, and I don't get involved in this. I'm more kind of in the listening part of things. We have a
Hmm.
list of therapists, hypnotherapists, and counselors that people can talk to and kind of deal with the traumas that happen because of this. So, yeah,
Wow, that's
their reality's a lot stranger than we think it is. At least that's my perception of it.
100% agree, and that's a wonderful service because I think it's the biggest part with the paranormal and understanding of it is talking about it
Yeah.
and being able to talk about it. So, if there's that's really cool. I'd be interested to check that out because I would refer people there as well.
Oh, I
Um,
come across them on these podcasts all the time, and they don't know about it. So I usually pass this along. I'll send you some contact
yeah,
information.
that's really cool. That's one thing that I've always kind of promoted conferences for is it's a place you can go and talk to other people that have had experiences or similar experiences, and you're not judged.
Yeah.
That you can talk to, oftentimes at conferences there's paranormal teams there, and you can talk to people, and that's huge in accepting or understanding of what may be going on around you. So that's really cool, a neat service.
Yeah, I think it is too. And I also facilitate a group where I live called Stranger Things, if you're familiar with the Netflix
Oh
show.
yeah.
And we all have the Stranger Things t-shirts. And that group kind of becomes a place where people can come and talk about, it's kind of like Opus, talk about things that they probably couldn't talk about otherwise without being viewed as a nut job. So yeah, I understand that connection. Tell me about the group that now. So is Port Gamble Paranormal you, or is it a team of people, or how would you describe that?
It's me. It's not a team, although I would include my wonderful wife Molly.
Okay,
She helps me out with stuff, and I have a wonderful sister-in-law who helps me out on tours. But the Port Gamble Paranormal is me. I used to belong to a couple different groups up here in Washington.
which ones, out
Um,
of curiosity?
so the OPS, so it's Olympic Peninsula Paranormal Society,
Okay,
and there was a group called Paranormal Research and Investigations (PRI), and they focused on investigations and experiments
Mm,
to, prove or disprove different things. And so that
mm,
was a really cool group to be a part of. But I've been doing my own thing, and I've met so many people over the years through the Port Gamble Ghost Conference, which is coming up Veterans Day weekend in November. I've met so many great people that I don't really need to have my own team. I can go
right,
investigate with different people, and that's fun to do collaborations like that. So, I've been very. I talk about this on my Ghost Walk tours that although I'm a believer in the paranormal, I've kind of learned how to investigate by some of the best skeptics in the paranormal,
right. I understand
and
that.
so it's kind of a nice balance to be able to be a believer and be open to having experiences, but also try and logically explain things
Mhm.
first and then go from there. So it's been quite a cool adventure so far.
Yeah, I used to belong to Boo, which was the Bellingham Observers of the Odd and Obscure. And then
That's
for a
cool.
while here in Olympia, I formed the Olympia Paranormal Research Group. So I'm familiar with that group kind of process, which sometimes isn't the most satisfying. So somebody once asked me what the worst thing about being in a paranormal group was, and I said, "Well, it's the group," because you brought people in that sometimes weren't on the same page. So
Sure.
tell me what you've learned about. Well, tell me about Port Gamble. I haven't been there. Tell me about the haunted aspect of Port Gamble. I think our listeners would be interested in that. Maybe weave in the ghost conference that they have there.
Sure. Well, how much time we got? No. um, Port Gamble is you'll get to tell that I like talking about it. It's one of Washington's oldest towns, like I mentioned before. It was founded in 1853 by Mainers Pope and Talbot. They were from East Machias, Maine, and it was a sawmill town. And they
Mm,
had a sawmill from 1853 until 1995. It's the longest running sawmill in U.S. history. And so the town was just kind of built up around the sawmill, like every other coastal town up here in Washington and Puget Sound and out to the coast. It was fishing and logging is what built the Washington Territory. And so there was a sawmill here, and this little tiny town of about 10 to 20 people to start out with turned into 900
well,
by 1900. And then there was just ups and downs. There was the depression, there was a lot of ups and downs. The automobile came and kind of killed a lot of company towns, but Port Gamble remained. It's still a company owned town, so I work for the company that owns the town,
what's
and
the company?
it's called Rainier. It's a timber
Rainier?
company. Used to be Pope and Talbot, and they Rainier bought Pope and Talbot out in May of 2020. So it was pretty much the same company from 1853 until 2020. And so I'm the town site manager, which is a lot of people call me mayor, but I say you can't call me mayor because I'm not elected. I'm hired. And so it's just a really unique little gem out on the west side of Puget Sound. You can take a ferry from Seattle and get there pretty easily. And it's just full of history. It's all Victorian buildings.
Mm,
The date range of the houses are from 1859, which is the oldest existing residence in Washington that we have here. So the oldest one's 1859. The newest home is 1919.
mm,
So that gives an idea of the kind of the date range of all the buildings here.
a lot of history.
Yeah, and so it was a working town up till 95, and then the sawmill closed and everybody moved out. And then the company decided to at that time uh rezone the kind of downtown area to get shops in there to start attracting people to come out and check out Port Gamble. And so it was more tourism driven starting in the very end of the 90s and to present. And so a lot of work was done early on to renovate. and get places inhabitable so you could have people, businesses in them, and then residents as well. So it's kind of this cool step back in time when you come here. The buildings have been preserved. There used to be about 400 buildings in the whole town. Now there's about 56. So we're lucky to have what we have, but it's been very well taken care of, all these past, 25 years since the mill closed. So it's literally, you can come walk down the streets and see what they looked like 100 years ago.
Cool.
And the being that the founders and all the original workers were from Maine,
Maine. Mhm.
they made it look like Maine. So the
Oh,
building, they kind of laid it out, or made buildings like they did in East Machias, Maine. So it looks like a New England town out in the middle of nowhere in Washington, and it's Victorian. The design aesthetic is Victorian for some of the houses, and it's just a wonderful homage to history. It's weird to think that, when Washington became a state in the early 1880s, Port Gamble was already going for almost 30 years.
well,
When the
yeah.
Civil War kicked off, Port Gamble was already a working town and growing.
Hmm.
It's kind of weird when you think about West Coast history and, whatever, everything going on back east, and these guys were just out here making their town. And so it's really cool. The history is really cool. We have a really neat museum in Port Gamble. It's open in the summers, and it's an amazing collection of artifacts from the town, and the archives are amazing. So for a history person, like me, and I would
Nirvana.
definitely amateur
Well, yeah.
historian, but it was just like, whoa, this place
Hmm.
is really cool. And because of all the archives and all the documentation and research on the history that's already been done, it's like you can literally step back in time in a snap of a finger here.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about the ghost tour. Is that
Mhm.
something you exclusively do?
Yes. So
Yeah.
yeah. So the town started doing ghost walks, around 2010. And then I started working for the town in 2011. And our boss at the time didn't want to keep going out at night on the weekends, and asked if anybody would like to take over the ghost walks. And so I volunteered.
Raised your hand. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was already interested in it. And so I started doing them in 2011. And so I'm just starting my 13th season come
Wow.
October. And it's a fun tour. So I've been doing it since 2011. It became my own business in 2016. And so I've been doing it as my own business, since then. And it's a 3 hour tour, which most people are like, wow, 3 hours? Oh, it takes every bit of 3 hours to get through everything. And
Yeah. Tell me about
people
some of
always,
the places that are highlighted,
yeah.
haunted places that are highlighted.
Well, the museum is where we start. Wonderful place to learn some of the basic history, see some of the people in pictures, and some of the artifacts. And so we start in the museum, and there's actually activity that happens in the museum. There's some unexplained things we've had going on in there. Then we go up to the post office slash theater building. And the theater was built in 1906, the whole building. And so the post office has the original P.O. boxes from 1906.
Yeah.
Theater upstairs. And then there was one of the town's morgues was in the basement of that place for a few
Oh,
decades. And then from there, we go up to the cemetery. And it's one of the oldest established cemeteries in Puget Sound. It was established in 1856. And so that's just a really neat place there. And then we kind of walk around the main core of the town, and talk about many of the houses on the main street. It's called Rainier Avenue. And then we usually end with about an hour or so to kick around in what's known as the most active location in town. And it's the Walker Ames Mansion.
oh, I think I've heard
And
of that.
yeah, it was cool a few years ago. Somebody sent me that we were in the History Channel's magazine, and it's one of the top haunted places in Washington, and it was featuring the Walker Ames house. So it's a pretty well-known spot for paranormal activity, and I think I've spent um, over 1,300 hours in there over the years, and so it's kind of it's been kind of my paranormal lab, so to
Mm.
speak, over the years. It's a wonderful place, and so that's the highlight of the tour is to go in the walk rooms. That's where everyone wants to go, and so we usually get about an hour in there on the tour. And I have those starting in October, and it's all at portgambleparanormal.com if you want to see dates. And then I've also started about 2013 offering public investigations
Oh.
at the Walker Ames. And so that's 3 hours just at the Walker Ames house. And I'll kind of lead an investigation. And just to give people a sense, if you haven't ever done an investigation, we talk about some of the equipment. I have meters that we pass out. I kind of try and show everybody how to use them.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily how they use them on the TV shows, but show them how to
Mm-hmm.
use them.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll perform, an informal investigation. But over the years, stuff happens on the tours
I
and the
bet.
investigations, and keeps people coming back and or leaving as a believer in the paranormal when maybe they were skeptical coming into it. So the tour is really fun because it's a ton of history and then ghost stories along the whole way.
Oh, I bet that's
Um,
good.
it's fun. It's a lot of fun, and there's always new stuff happening. So every year I start the tour, you'd think somebody get burned out after that many years, but there's always new stuff to talk about. There's new experiences.
Mm-hmm.
This happened on a tour this last season. This was on an investigation. So there's always a new ghost story to tell because the town just gives. There's just a lot going on here, and
It's active. Sounds like paranormally active.
it's very active. In fact, the just yesterday I was touring some people around the town for tourism, and we went into the Port Gamble Theater. I just wanted them to, get their eyes on it because it's a wonderful old building, really neat theater. So we went in there, and up in the balcony behind where we were standing, half of the balcony was curtained off with an opening kind of in the middle, like somebody had taken and opened part of the drapery so they could see out. And one of the people I was touring with said, "Well, is there somebody here? Who's upstairs? I just saw somebody walk by up there." And I said, "Well, we're the only ones in here, but let's go check it out." And I didn't have any equipment with me, but we went upstairs and both hit this certain spot, getting closer to where she had seen this thing, and it was, almost made you want to fall over the feeling. And it was an overwhelming sense of energy
Wow.
in this area. And then it got really cold
Mm.
and like freezing cold, and then it got really warm in this spot, which was kind of interesting. So I think we even, may have had a personal experience there. So you never know what's going to happen. I've lived in 3 different houses here, and one house didn't really have any sort of experiences, but the other two we've had experiences. Um, and so it's just kind of a normal thing here. There's a couple of places here where if I have somebody moving in, I may ask them, are they okay with paranormal activity? Because they will most likely experience it and want to make
Right.
sure they know about it before they move in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I won't share where those locations are because they're private residences, but
Yeah. Understood.
but
Um,
it's in every corner of their town, there's something going on.
yeah. So, in my experience with groups, and you being kind of an individual, we're not talking a group here, but there was like somebody who had psychic abilities or mediumistic skills, which is you, and then there were like techie folks who were
Hmm.
part of the group, and they were trying to prove essentially what uh, the medium was picking up on. So, and like I said, you're kind of a one-man group in some respects. Talk about the technology that you use in your ghost investigations. K2 meters, trying to measure
Sure. Yeah.
electromagnetic fields, and what you
Yeah.
think about all those things.
Well, tools are great to use. And I would just say that, for mediums that are on teams, they are part of the utility belt of the team. To me, a medium is providing a different perspective of investigation, a different perspective on the location, the history. So, in a sense, they're kind of a medium should be utilized as a tool as well. You don't, I've always kind of believed that us, the investigators, can be our best tool as well, as long as you can remain skeptical in what you're experiencing. And so, what I typically use is digital audio recorder.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can use your phone, you can use your built-in voice recorder, or take
Mm-hmm.
video as well. But I'll use I have like a basic Sony digital audio recorder, and I do my audio review in a program called Audacity, which a lot of people probably know about, but it's
Right. I'm
free.
familiar with that. Yeah.
It's not as cool as some of the other programs out there, but it's free and it does the job. I use dowsing rods as well
Oh, cool.
sometimes, for that's more for energy work in a location. I do have some K2 meters. They are, I always preface when I'm passing these things out for people to try out that those are super faulty. They can get very well known for false readings. So you have to be careful how you use them. I typically tend to try and use them as, if another type of meter is picking up a lot of electromagnetic field, maybe you'll take the K2 over and see what it does, and maybe that validates it. Or, I've used it before in, when you're getting just odd readings that they're not normal types of readings, trying to use them as a communication tool,
Hmm.
for like yes and no questions. But again, there's such a really touchy type meter. Um, there's smartphones and dumb phones. I call the K2 a dumb meter. Kind of. But it's interesting. I use a digital tri-field meter for electromagnetic fields.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to learn more about RF and how that radio frequency and how that ties in to everything. So
You
that's
ever
kind of a
use a
cool.
spirit box?
I do. Yeah, I was getting to that one.
Okay.
And I also use a millimeter for electromagnetic field. I feel like that's probably like the best quality for the price is a millimeter. It's EMF, and I typically use digital. I like to use digital readout meters, so you get like instant results and you can measure them. And so I use an array of electromagnetic field meters. I have a couple proximity sensors, that just like are like motion detect, and will tell you which side of the device that it's detecting motion. I have used Spirit Box quite often. It's interesting. I've kind of learned in the field of paranormal research, people hate it or they love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's somewhat controversial because it is so coincidental, or it can be perceived that way. Um, it would be very difficult to really run a spirit box through clean investigation parameters where you have multiple devices scanning the same stations and seeing if it's the same thing that's coming out. That would be difficult, but spirit box has always been kind of interesting to me. It's part of instrumental transcommunication, which the research on that's been going for like 100 years, using radio waves to try and get things to tune in from the other side. I would just say, until someone invents, to all the people that hate him, I always say, until somebody invents a meter that I can point in the corner of a room and it says there's a 35-year-old male who died by a wound in his leg and he's not
Yeah.
happy to be here, we don't really have proper equipment to perceive what we think is paranormal.
Yeah,
And
I would
so
really agree with that.
the use of a spirit box to me is more of a why not? Why not give it a shot? Because there's no true meter that detects ghosts
Right.
out there. And so I find it interesting, and it can be super coincidental. But if you try, in my opinion, if you kind of set up, you know what you're going to ask, if you're going to set yourself up for, putting parameters around your investigation rules and things like that, you can kind of narrow it down. Like, for instance, one thing I like to do is if I'm going to do an audio session with a spirit box, I'm going to try and ask a lot of yes and no questions. And I'm going to ask yes and no questions, and I'm going to ask for things to give me an answer and saying my name along with their answer so that I know they're talking to me. So I would want to hear a yes, Pete, or a no, Pete. And, you can try and be real specific with it. And it's worked before. Some of the people on the Olympic Peninsula Paranormal team have had just amazing results with a spirit box. And so it's always been an interest of mine. Using the Estes method is really interesting to me, where if your listeners aren't familiar, it's you have noise canceling headphones and a blindfold put on one person who's listening to the spirit box, and all
Okay.
they're supposed to do is say the words that they hear as they happen. So the ghost box is, scanning radio stations constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And so the listener is just they should not be able to hear anybody around them. So you're observing this person with the blindfold and the headphones, and they are just supposed to say words or sentences, or, two words if they hear them together. However they're hearing it, when they hear it, they say it instantaneously. What's going on around the sitter, the listener, is the investigators are asking questions about the location. What's your name? Is there somebody here? What happened to you? Maybe you know the historic information of a location. Was there a murder here? If you're
Mm-hmm.
in a jail, what are you in jail for? Ask questions like that. And it's really interesting because a lot of times that I've witnessed, you almost start to have a conversation with the person who's listening, and you're getting answers to the questions you're asking, and that person doesn't hear you. They're just saying what they're hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Cool.
so it's an interesting way to try and establish, in a sense, a communication link to the other side. So spirit box is very controversial, but,
Yeah.
in a nutshell, I'm always think, well, why not? What if we hit the right formula here and something happens and we discover a new way to communicate,
Mm-hmm.
But
I always think about pareidolia, the
oh
idea
yeah.
that
Hmm.
you can make uh, there are patterns out there that people pick up on that aren't
Yep.
really there. So I guess that's one of my wonders about a spirit box.
Yeah, and you always have to be conscious of that. You have to be conscious of the bias of the person listening. That what is their bias towards what's happening. That's why it's kind of fun to on during a paranormal investigation. It's almost fun to observe the investigators more than investigate the location,
Hmm.
because you can learn a lot, and you kind of really see what's going on, because I firmly believe that um, we can definitely manifest our own stuff. If you're going into a place because you heard there was an axe murder, and you're looking for an axe murderer, and you're looking for an axe, and you're looking for a beheaded body, you're probably going to see or experience something like that
Hmm.
because you want it to happen. You're so looking for it. You're so looking for that pattern to see, right? And so we all have to really be careful of our own bias as a medium doing, to do investigations. Like, I'll do my best to not know anything about where, if I'm going to investigate somewhere, to do like a psychic mediumship reading on a location,
Hmm.
I don't want to know anything about it except for where I got to go, you know. And then, because I don't want to know that, oh hey, there was a murder in
Right.
the back 40 of this place, because then I'm going to be thinking about it, and that can maybe affect how I investigate. And so, as a investigator that's not investigating doing mediumship, you kind of want to do the same sort of thing. Like I like to do an investigation and then do historical research,
Hmm.
and then see what lines up. And one tool that I forgot to mention earlier was a notebook.
Right.
Um,
Pretty basic.
but it's so important to now. If you're like me and you're carrying a meter and you're carrying a flashlight or your audio device, it's hard to write stuff when your hands are full. So one thing I found that works well, and many people, tons of people do this, is if you have two audio devices, leave one somewhere, in an area that's got a lot of reported activity, and then take one with you. That's your notebook. You're making a vocal log of everything happening. Oh, I think I just heard a car door shut outside. I just heard a dog barking outside. There's a lot of wind going on. I didn't eat dinner, so that was my stomach you just heard. You're making a vocal log of the investigation without having to write everything down. So a notebook, or make sure you're taking notes. That's like probably the most important tool, because if you don't have some sort of documentation of what you're experiencing, it's not happening,
And the human
So
mind is such so that it's easy to forget certain things that happen.
totally, totally.
Hmm.
There was a time here in Port Gamble. This was a couple of years ago. It was about 10 o'clock at night. I was at the Walker Ames house waiting for some friends to stop by, and realized I had forgot something in my car. So there's a kind of a wood walkway and a ramp on the back of the house there, and so I started walking, and I heard we have a general store building that's next door to the house, and I heard the front door slam shut, and a gentleman walked out, and we were walking the same speed towards the curb. And I turned to say, "Hey, it's me," because I would often let the dishwashers at the store know I'm down walking around, so they wouldn't get freaked out seeing somebody walking around the house. So I turned to say hello, thinking it was one of their employees. This man stepped over the curb and vanished.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
I wish I would have had my phone going and taking
Hmm.
video. So
Yeah.
there's so many things like that you just don't catch. But if you can document something, that's worth something there.
We kind of touched on this a little bit. EVPs, electronic voice phenomena. So,
Mhm.
what's your spin on that?
I don't know if I have a spin on it other than it's to me, other than personal experiences, it's probably the most captured type of evidence. Um, I I'm a musician. I've always played music, and so I love reviewing audio.
Hmm.
I hate reviewing video footage,
Hmm.
but I like doing audio. It seems to be, and I don't know why, but a more common type of evidence that's captured. And I also like to say, for your listeners out there, evidence is not proof,
Right.
right, of the
Good point.
paranormal. So audio evidence is more common. It seems to be easier to get. It's maybe easier to review because video files are, huge. It's easier to, it's just an easier type of thing. So electronic voice phenomena, it's kind of still a mysterious thing. How does something imprint onto a digital device?
Hmm.
It's something to be said for the old school and doing tape recording. Well, something, could be a little easier to digest if you know that it's being imprinted on the magnets that are in the tape recorder, right? And as the tape runs over the recording, or recording on a record, how do things get imprinted onto a digital, file? That's pretty interesting, but very compelling. What I've been trying to do over the past a few years is when I review an audio file, run it into a spectrogram as well. So you can see what hertz the frequencies are of the different things you hear. So let's say I identify something that I think is a spirit. Um, you know, it's going to be above. It's probably going to be above 20 hertz in the sound range. And so it's kind of another way that you can see the audio in what it's doing. Um, so EVPs are, I love them. I've captured many of them. Um, it's it's fun when you catch one that you can't explain. It can't be explained away. Or I've captured ones where I've gotten a direct response to my question, and
Hmm.
they said my name too.
Wow.
Um, and that particular one instance there was what I call a disembodied voice, right? There's EVP and then there's disembodied voice. Disembodied voice, when it happens, you hear it. An EVP, you don't necessarily hear it when it happens, but it shows up on your
Shows on
audio
the
file.
your recording device.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so I've gotten a lot of disembodied voices as well. But I love audio just in general. And so I think EVPs, disembodied voices, audio evidence is always really compelling to me. Even though you can't see what's going on, but hearing what's going on is pretty awesome.
So let's talk about, and we'll be conscious of the fact you might want to go to bed, although you probably keep late hours if you're out doing investigations.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. You think? Um, so, what is your perspective about death and what happens to us when we die? And why are some? I went to Gettysburg several
Hmm.
years ago,
Hmm.
and because of the same kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And what was surprising to me was there were people I was with that were hearing sounds of the battle,
Hmm.
were seeing apparition of the soldiers, and then there were others who weren't. So I began wondering, why are some people tuned to this and some people not? What would you say to that?
So, well, I'll start with, with that part of it. It's in what I've learned in doing mediumship, and it's something that I'll never stop learning. It's always, we'll never know all the answers until we're on the other side, right?
Right.
Just remembering that. But I think that some people, it could be a physical thing. Maybe your pineal gland in your brain is more
Mm-hmm.
developed. One thing I've noticed is it would be interesting. So if you're ever in a situation like that again, and you've got a group of people that are um, seeing, reporting things as it's happening. Oh my gosh, I just saw this, I heard this, and the person standing next to him doesn't. One thing that might be interesting to know is, what is the person who is seeing things? What is their relationship to music?
Mm.
It's something that's intrigued me for quite some time. And a lot of mediums and sensitive people and empaths are really into music, or they play music, and it's what music does to your brain. It makes other connections that maybe someone who is not really musical at all, doesn't care about music, it's not a thing for them. Um, their brain chemist makeup is going to look different than someone who plays drums.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, because it would be interesting to find out, but it's been my experience that a lot of people who are open and sensitive either are really into music that they like and they listen to music a lot, or they play music. There's some sort of connection, because a musician's brain there's other neural pathways that are created because of music. And so the right and left brain talk to each other a little bit differently if you develop it through playing like music. And so that to me is kind of, might explain why some people are more open to paranormal experiences and some
Mm-hmm.
seem to not be, or some people are susceptible to experiencing something and some people are not. I've got some friends that say they're ghost repellent. They never experience anything. If you don't want to have something happen, take
Yeah,
me with
take
you,
them with it. Yeah. Okay.
um but
Interesting.
it's your mindset, it's how open-minded you can be. So I think it just kind of depends on each person if they're going to be open or not. I do believe that everybody has psychic abilities.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of being human. We're all born with it, but what do we do with it? And typically it's buried, with what we're taught through, culturally, religiously. it's always been kind of a stigma. Like you mentioned earlier, people don't want to talk about things because they don't want people to think they're crazy.
Yeah.
And so we push that stuff down, we push it down, we push it down. And so I think everybody is born with psychic abilities. It's whether or not we stay open enough to be able to use them. And so, at Gettysburg, just to kind of circle back, I think it depends on the person you are, if you're going to be open to it or not. Um, as far as experiencing something. Now, perspective on death, um, I don't I don't know if I have a really great answer on that other than um, in my experience as a medium and communicating with spirits from the other side, whether it be for a person or if it's at a location, this is a one stop on our soul's journey. Is this world, this reality, this physical shell that we have? That it's one stop. And when our physical body dies, we transition and into the next phase of our soul's journey. One thing I think about is we have electrodes in our hearts and our brains, nerves, right? There's electrical signals within us. It's energy, right?
Hmm.
Our heartbeat, our brain waves, our brain function is energy. And one of the main tenets of science is you can't destroy energy, you can only
Right.
transform it. So when our physical shell dies, the energy isn't just destroyed, it's transformed.
Hmm.
And from an investigative or a scientific standpoint, what is a ghost, right? What is an entity? What is an anomaly? Often captured through electromagnetic fields. Because what if we have our own electromagnetic field, and when we pass, it's in a I think it's kind of in a sense an independent electromagnetic field. And I believe that there is a light that we go to, choose to or not choose to go to, but that light is high energy. And in my belief and experience, when we go through the light, I call it the soul's car wash. It washes everything that held you down physically in your life on this planet, right? So, medical ailments, mental health, anxiety, all your feelings and guilt and everything like that that you may go through after you pass away. When you go to the light, you're basically washing all that off, and you come back, and you can come back and visit and go wherever you want, and you are a part of that light at that point. Um, and so, there are people that don't go to the light. They choose not to, or maybe they don't know to. Maybe they don't know they're dead. So there's kind of a whole mix there. But I believe that once, our physical body dies, our energy is transformed. Well, what is that? And again, we'll never truly know until we're at that point in our lives and we're on the other side. But I do believe that we go wherever our memories take us. We go where other guides that come meet us on the other side, they help take us to where we need to go. So it's endless. I could go on at for hours probably.
Well, that's because it's a
Oh yeah.
complex situation, so
We can't even perceive it. I don't
yeah.
think, what
Uh,
can we perceive?
we did a show with a lady whose name is Angela Smith, and she's a
Okay.
remote viewer. And
Hmm.
one of the things she got talking about was we're all subject to cultural trance. That was her term. And how she defined that is our culture tells us what we can perceive and what we can't perceive, and what's appropriate to perceive and what's not appropriate. And that made a lot of sense to me, because we are taught that reality is a certain way, and that may not be the way it is at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. I was just having a conversation with a friend yesterday talking about, well, we only use 10, my point was we only use 10% of our brain.
Hmm.
So what are we not perceiving, by not utilizing 90% of our brain? And my buddies had a really good point and said, well, you can you can teach a chimpanzee to do things, but you can't teach a chimpanzee to do like quantum physics.
Yeah, right.
Even though it's not using 100% of its brain, it just can't comprehend it. It can't perceive it. And we're like, a thumbnail away from them
Hmm.
in DNA. So
Right.
so how could we possibly perceive everything? And so yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. And I do think, yeah, it's how we're raised. It's our own bias that has
Hmm.
like the biggest impact on everything we do is our own internal bias. It's not just humans. Animals have bias as well, and usually use that through instinct. So yeah, I think it's many things. Everything around us affects what how much we can perceive, how much we can comprehend, seeing ghosts or not seeing ghosts. Yeah, I think it
That
all
makes a lot
ties
of
in.
sense.
Hmm.
Now, and I don't know that you're into this, but a couple of the paranormal groups I was into, um, when they were interested in things other than um, ghosts. For
Hmm.
instance, some of them really got into UFOs,
Hmm.
and then some of them even got into cryptids. And of course, living in Washington State, Bigfoot came up on
Oh
the
yeah.
radar quite frequently. Do you dabble in any of those?
I
Um,
mean, I've so I grew up big science fiction fan.
yeah,
Um, I so it's always something I've been interested in. I've met more people, over the past few years who do research, and I find it really interesting. I would love to go on my first Bigfoot expedition
yeah.
and go out there. I call me crazy, but I think that that's a real thing.
I think it
um,
is too.
I and I so I'm interested in all of that stuff, and I hosted a show for about 3 years and had many different kinds of researchers on, and I always just found it so interesting, to talk more about cryptids, UFO, and the paranormal. It's all paranormal when you think
Yeah.
about it, right? And so I love that kind of stuff. I am very interested in it. You know, on the UFO side of things, I've talked to some people about this dream that I've had throughout my life. It's a recurring dream, and it's always the same beings in it. They don't seem to be. They seem humanoid, but they are not. They are not humans. They seem to have bluish skin, although I can never really see their face.
Hmm.
They've got white hair. Um, they have been in my dreams since I was a kid. They never say
Hmm.
anything to me. We never talk out loud, and they just kind of stand there, and they've got really long fingers. But I believe now, after looking back and what I've experienced as a medium, that they are guides for me, but they are not earthly. They are not
Hmm.
human. They're from somewhere else. And so that's always kind of piqued my interest more as well. I had an experience with what I think is a Sasquatch
Hmm.
here in Port Gamble, and it was kind of a. I'll try and briefly tell the story, but
No,
um,
hey, go
it's
for it.
yeah, it's an interesting one. I didn't see anything; it was what we heard.
Hmm.
Um, but so I live in Port Gamble, right in the backyard of the town. It's a really small town, by the way.
Hmm.
Right at the backyard of it, there are over 3,600 acres of trails, and it's part of this vast wooded corridor that goes through the Kitsap area. Um, and so one night, it was late at night, 1 o'clock on a Saturday night. There you busted me on my late night hours. Um, I had my dog outside and doing his business, and this noise kind of came into focus after a minute, and it sounded like a bear is what I would describe it as initially. It was kind of like this really guttural,
Hmm. Yeah.
sort of thing. But then there was also this like weird tapping repetitive noise that was going along with it. and it was kind of random, but it was like a rhythm. It was kind of this weird knocking wood sounding rhythm that was going with this guttural sound. So I walked where I live, I can see the tree line where the woods start, but I walked across my street up onto a hill and I got into really like more of a straight on earshot of what was going on. And it sounded to me like wood knocking with this
Mhm.
weird guttural sound.
Yep.
And it was again the rhythm, it was like a it was strange. And so I kind of walked back over to my house. And then it went on for quite a while. And this is one of those I didn't think to pull my phone out when it was happening because I was so creeped out.
Yeah.
And so I went back to my house and it just kind of stopped. It kind of lost its energy and it just kind of stopped. And I was just going, what in the world was that? It's such a weird sound. I know that, cougars and coyotes, I know they can all make really odd noises, but it was just this really deep guttural sort of thing. And then you can hear at night semi trucks coming down the highway like from a long ways away. So after this noise stops, then I hear some vehicle, like a vehicle in a low gear coming close to town. I'm thinking, okay, it's a semi truck, on the highway going through. And it wasn't a semi truck, it was three military Humvees
Hmm.
going about less than 5 miles an hour. And there was three of them. They had guys in the turrets on top with 30 cal machine guns.
Wow.
They were spotlighting the woods where I was hearing this thing as they're driving through the town. And so they went out of view, they continued, and then I could hear their vehicles on some of the logging roads that are come kind of back up close to town. I could hear their rigs on there. And then I didn't hear anything else after that. And so I was really wigged out that the military was there within about 8 minutes. The closest base here is about 12 minutes away. And so they were here within 8 minutes. And there was three Humvees. And I so I was really tripped out about that. A couple of days go by, and a buddy of mine came over, and I said, "We're going in the woods. We got to go check this out." And so we get up to the tree line, and kind of on the west side, there's an area where landscapers will dump grass clippings and stuff, and it's
Hmm.
just kind of in the tree line. And then on the east side of the tree line, there is a trail that some of our employees cut in, and somebody put a Sasquatch wood sculpture there, so we call it Sasquatch Trail.
Hmm.
Not because I don't know why, but it's just what it was called.
Yeah.
And so that was, and so you've got about 250, 300 feet between those two spots. And so we went to the west side where the land care clippings and stuff are. And this is where it gets interesting. As soon as we stepped off the grass into the tree line, there were two loud boom, boom
Hmm.
knocks. And so we kind of looked around, we heard the knocks, and then we kind of went back out. Then we walked down to where the Sasquatch trail head is. We went in there. As soon as we stepped into the tree line there were again two loud knocks close to us. Mind you, we just walked 250, 300 feet down. So there were two wood knocks, and this particular trail went up, did a 90 degrees for about 6 feet, and then another 90-degree turn, continued going in the direction that we were initially headed on. And at that point, I don't know if you're familiar with like a power line cutout,
Yeah.
where they cut out an area to run power lines through.
Right.
So that trail intersects one of those. And the grass was, 4 or 5 feet tall in there, like meadow grass and stuff. We got to the first little bend there and we felt a big boom in our feet.
Hmm.
Something hit the ground. And then it went boom, 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 boom. And we could hear it go from one side to the other. We could hear it go past us. And so we were like, I'm definitely in my mind going, oh my God, what the hell was that? We went around the corner, intersected with the power line cutout, and we found huge depressions in the grass of, I would say, like a size 16 foot.
Mm-hmm.
They were about 6 feet apart in this grass, and one was on one side of the trail we were on, one was on the other side, and it was kind of muddy. There was no track in the middle of the trail, so it was a 6 foot span. And we ended up following those depressions in the grass all the way straight into a mountain of blackberry bushes. These prints went straight in there.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing that we could cast because it was the grass was so thick, but it went straight into a mountain of blackberry bushes. And I'm like, okay, if it was a person trying to hoax us or something, they've got to be hurting pretty bad right now because they're in the thick of the thorns in there. So we ended up going back to the trail. We exited the trail where we came from, and we decided to go back down to the first area where the land care clippings and stuff are. We stepped into the tree line, and again, two loud knocks close to us. Boom, boom. And I remember thinking, there's two of us. And every time we've entered the trees, there's been two knocks.
Mm.
And so we were looking around, had the feeling of being watched, but that's probably because we're kind of on high alert. What's
Yeah,
going on
really.
here? And we kind of, had said, "Oh, let's go. Let's get out of here." And had just started kind of walking out, and then we heard what I can't really describe other than it sounded like a huge monkey. We
Mm-hmm.
we turned around, started to walk away, and then we hear this whoop 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 whoop
Mm-hmm.
woo,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounded huge. And my adrenaline started pumping, and we got the hell out of there.
Which might have been a really good choice at that time.
Well, we had my dog with us,
Oh yeah.
um, and it said that Sasquatch does not like dogs, and he definitely didn't want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So he was really yarfing on my arm to get out of there the whole time. So we just got out of there, but so I didn't see it, but I mean, it was just such a weird experience. And then
Mm-hmm.
to have the noises the 2 nights before and the military Humvees, what was going on with that? And we
Yeah.
went we went specifically into the area where I was hearing this stuff happen. And then we had the knocking and the footsteps, and it was just such a weird experience. I don't know what to say other than I hope it was Sasquatch.
Mm-hmm. You might look at our Anomalies website because a couple of videos that might be of interest. There's a guy back in Pennsylvania, Stan Gordon, who's been investigating paranormal things his entire life. He's probably as old as I am. And he's had a lot of reports that involve Sasquatch sightings seen in relationship to UFOs. So he thinks
Yep.
there's some kind of connection between those two things.
That's part one of the main camps in Sasquatch thinking is, yeah, that they're transdimensional
Yeah.
or extraterrestrial themselves. And I've heard of a lot of strange lights
Hmm.
in the woods, and then there's an experience with the Sasquatch,
Yeah.
around where there's strange lights, things like that. And I've always kind of I'm definitely on the outside of the whole Sasquatch thing.
Yeah.
Until I go do my own expeditions and some of my own research, I'm just gonna say I'm a fan
Hmm.
and very interested in it and open to having an experience. Um, there's kind of, there's the two camps that have kind of settled up, in the Sasquatch world of they are transdimensional, you know, extraterrestrial, and the other camp is it's a relict species,
Right.
that has survived for however many thousands of years. And on my podcast, I've had a number of cryptid researchers, and I kind of threw this at one of the guys, and he was like, "Huh." Because I said, "What if it's both?
Hmm.
Um, what if it's both in some ways, where it is a relic species that has unlocked the parts of nature that we can't perceive.
Right.
Unlocked being able to cloak yourself and hide, and not just automatically assume they've gone into a tree, which is a portal, and it's taken them, onto a spaceship and they're out of here. But what if it's a relict species who has learned how to be transdimensional
Have
because
you
of how
ever
old it is?
interviewed Jeff Meldrum from
I
ISU?
haven't I haven't talked to him yet, but
Yeah,
Ken Gerhard was
yeah.
he was really cool to talk to, and I talked to Ron Moorhead
Oh
also,
yeah, Ron.
who's amazing, and both those guys are on different sides of that spectrum.
Hmm.
And so I just was like, let's put it together, guys. Let's go with the transdimensional or extraterrestrial, but also relic species. They may have figured things out that we'll never figure out about this planet. I
Yeah.
think that's the kicker. That's the mystery, is that they have unlocked something.
Another guy you might want to listen to is Simeon, Simeon
Okay.
Hein, Hein. And he thinks that cryptids have kind of learned ways to deal with plasma energy, dark matter, and that's how they take on this paranormal aspect.
That's pretty interesting.
It is
Hmm.
very interesting. And he's a great guy. Simeon's a great guy.
Yeah,
So
wow,
something
that's
to
cool.
ponder.
Yeah. Well, you're giving me lots to think about tonight.
Well, I'm going to let you go, and I want to thank you so much for spending time on Anomalies. I really enjoyed connecting to a fellow Boisean and
Right on.
just kind of reliving that part of my life. I'll send you a link to Opus,
Okay, please.
and
Yes, thank
you
you.
might find that that's interesting. And who knows, maybe I'll show up at the Port Gamble Ghost Conference
Yeah,
sometime.
I hope to see you there. It's November 8th through 10th. And you
Okay.
can get to it through my website at portgambleparanormal.com, or go to the town's website at portgamble.com. We'd love to have you there. It's a great group of people that come out every year for the conference, and it's always a ton of new people
Yeah.
too, which is great. So, yeah, I hope to
So,
see you out here.
somebody else you might know. Do you know James Clarkson and his?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So,
Yes,
yeah,
I
Joanna. Yeah,
they are amazing people.
they are.
Become fast friends with them over the past few years, and Joanne and I have done a number of mediumship gallery readings together and workshops, and they're some of the best humans I know. I love those guys.
I would concur with that. Well,
Yeah,
have a good evening, Pete. Thanks for coming on Anomalies, and I'll send you some information and maybe check out some of those things, Simeon Hine and Stan Gordon, because they're pretty interesting people as well.
that sounds wonderful. Thanks so much for the opportunity to come on and talk with you. Let's do it again.
Yeah, we'll plan on that. So I'm
Great.
going to close this out here. Hopefully, I know what I'm doing. All right. Thanks a lot, Pete.
Thank you.